Petition of Right. The document we're going to worry about here is the Petition of Right of 1628. But we've got an issue of Parliament that we've got to deal with. The Petition of Right of 1628 is the third liberty document. So we got Charles I here, 1625. And if you'll notice, about every 150 years, 1625, about every 150 years or so, we have another crisis in English history that brings us either to a war or a potential war. Even in our own nation, you'll notice from the time the American Revolution occurs to the time the Civil War occurs is about 150 years, and we are now due for another one if we stay with that 150-year pattern. Now, at this time, that the British Isles have been consolidated. He is known as King James. He's Charles I, but he's also known as King James VI and King James I. He's also known as the King of Scotland, as James VI. He's known as, in England and in Ireland, as James I. He's got multiple titles here. You don't need to know all of them. Just understand when you're dealing with British history, it is not just one individual, one title. They have different titles, different names in the different countries that they are king of. One thing, and I'm trying to make a connection to our culture, he's also the king that authorized the King James Bible. He does not like Puritans. He does not like separatists. And these individuals end up escaping with their lives, those who did get out of England. Many of them were killed and tortured. But they got out and went to Holland, and from there they ended up in Plymouth, Massachusetts, as individuals that we call as Puritans today. So when you think of Turkey Day and Thanksgiving, these are the same people. These people, the Puritans, are the ones who wanted to purify the church, clean up the corruption. At this time, by the way, we have two different Christian denominations. You have Protestants and you have Catholics. Well, before this time, Henry VIII, Henry VIII, or is it the fifth? I think it's Henry VIII. It is the eighth, because he wants to divorce his wife because she won't give him a male son. At that time, nobody knew it's the male that determines the sex of the baby, not the female. So in order to get a divorce, he has to get permission from the Pope. The Pope says that it's not a justification for a divorce. He goes, oh yeah, we'll see about that. He starts his own church, makes him the head of the church, and today that is called the Church of England. So at this time period, we have the Church of England. Very Catholicistic, very Catholic-like. It's really hard to tell the difference, but they are considered Protestant. The only difference that he really did in the Church of England is made him the head of the church, not the Pope. So even today, the King of England, the Queen of England is the head of the church over there. Today, the American version of the Church of England is called the Anglican Church, which many of our founding fathers, like George Washington, was a member of. But Charles I, or King James, he has a problem. He married a Catholic French woman, French princess. So Parliament, who's mostly members of the Protestant denomination, is very, very suspicious of him, very suspicious of her. They think he's going to be sympathetic to the Catholic Church, probably sympathetic to the Catholic French, which is their long-term mortal enemies, and they even suspect he will try to change the Church of England and move it back to Catholicism. So there's a big rift between Parliament and the king. And lo and behold, like I said, he marries a French Roman Catholic princess. But in 1627, there's a civil war in France against the Huguenot family clan, which is Catholic, and the Protestant group I can't remember the Protestant group, not important. He sends the Duke of Buckingham with a lot of money, government money, taxes, over to France to help pay for the war, to basically help support the Huguenots. And the Protestant Parliament went ballistic. They immediately impeached the Duke of Buckingham and charged the king with treason. How dare you support the Catholics? Never mind that they're French in the first place. This triggers a war between Parliament, it's called the parliamentarians, and the Cavaliers. The Cavaliers are those who supported the king, and the parliamentarians are the Protestants who supported Parliament. So you literally have a civil war between Parliament, their representative government, and the king himself. He escapes with his army to Scotland, thinking, Scots, they're Catholic, they'll help me out. They capture him and turn him over to Parliament. All right, so Parliament ends up saying, look, you're either going to comply and provide us this petition of rights, or we will execute you. The king agrees under duress, and it sets forth the following protected liberties. 1, taxes can only be levied by Parliament. So what he did is he disbanded Parliament and then levied taxes himself. In the Magna Carta, the king had the authority to call Parliament into session and disband it. So for many years, he did not allow Parliament to meet, and he just levied taxes himself and sent his own supporters in to collect. So in the Petition of Right, one of the first things they do, by the way, what they do in all of these documents is reassert the previous document. The Charter of Liberties and the Magna Carta still stand, and we want these. First one's the taxes can only be levied by Parliament. Martial law could not be imposed in peacetime. In other words, when you issue martial law orders, all civil liberties are suspended. If the president or governor ever issue martial law or declare martial law, our Constitution, either state or federal, is set aside. They could arrest you for any reason, detain you for any reason, you get no due process, nothing. Sometimes you need to do that in a time of war, in a time of crisis. When you, down in New Orleans, when they had the big hurricane during President Bush's administration, they had to declare martial law because there was no government system in place to protect people. So if you were seen like at midnight at night, you were assumed to be a criminal and you would be arrested as soon as you were caught. You could also be shot for that matter. A lot of people were. Of course, a lot of those people who were trying to rob and kill people. Prisoners must be able to challenge their detentions through what's called a writ of habeas corpus. Through a writ of habeas corpus, you have to declare why, as the government, why the individual has been arrested. You could not be arrested and not know why. Troops may not be quartered against the will of the residents. So what the king was doing, because he wanted to make sure he knew what was going on, he would send his military in and make them live in the houses of those in Parliament who was against him, so that they would keep tabs on you. And of course, when a soldier would come in your house, who got the best bed? The soldier did. Who got the best food? Soldier did. Who did all the laundry for the soldier? You did. In fact, you may end up living in the barn because his whole group might take over your house. And you had to pay for it all. So first time in our history, ours being because we are British at this time, First time in our history as a nation, we're not a nation yet, don't get me wrong, what I'm saying is in our heritage, you cannot have troops stay in someone's home without their permission. And we have a provision against the violation of due process. I have a right to challenge my detention. I have a right to see the evidence. I have a right to stand a trial. Do any of these provisions sound familiar to you? Yeah. I sure hope so. They're identical to what we have today in our Bill of Rights. Do you see how the liberties that we have today are, as we go in history, as we go further along, they become more and more articulate? They're written out in more clear language? Should be. Notice the assertion that the subjects had inherent rights. In fact, they even wrote that word in the document. That they have inherent rights. They were born into them. These are rights they already possessed, whether the king wanted to acknowledge it or not. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about the bishop wars. That leads us to our next item.